Well, the official narrative, as you dwell into this, is the notion that that nothing comes from ordinary working people from places like Newark or
Yeah.
wherever, right? That's one piece. Forget the race issue for a second.
Yeah,
And the second issue is that all great inventions must come from war,
that's right.
or you have to be anointed by the military industrial academic complex, number
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
So I'm observing all of this. Now you have to understand what they didn't know, what these guys didn't know was they had screwed around with the wrong Indian. My theory is the election in Massachusetts 2020 is going to be the most important election for the entire world. And let me tell
Right.
you why.
Mm-hmm.
Because Boston and Massachusetts, and I can tell you the longitude and the latitude is the location between MIT and Harvard, is the center of the deep state. Every major economic collapse you can probably trace to some Harvard or MIT professor. So when Bernie Sanders ran, right?
Yeah.
People said you should vote for him. I said, look, he's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did. He'll give all of his votes to Hillary Clinton, and no one believed me, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So right now, so when Trump won, I was watching him very carefully, and even on the debate stage, he never stopped attacking both parties.
Yeah.
So I realized this guy doesn't care, which is awesome.
Welcome to another episode of Independent Thought and Freedom, where we have conversations with some of the most interesting people around the world who are shaking up politics, society, economies, and ideas. We've had some amazing guests on this program, including The Saker, Paul Craig Roberts, Sheikh Imran Hussein, E. Michael Jones, Cynthia McKinney, and more. If you'd like to support us to reach our next goal of actually putting together live events where we bring some of my best guests side by side on one stage, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber on Patreon. You'll find the link below. Also, if you are an author or researcher with important ideas to share with the world and want to have a greater impact, I'm offering a free masterclass, 3 steps on how to leverage your intellectual authority to become a media personality. The link for that class is in the description as well. And now, on to this week's show. Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom. What do you do when you invent email at the age of 14 in 1978, but the US military, academic, and media establishment wants to deny you your achievement? What do you do when you have 4 degrees from MIT, are an entrepreneur, are a proven problem solver, but the whole world seems to believe in strident, unscientific ideology, and they believe that is settled science and that anyone who questions it is a conspiracy theorist? How about when the political establishment is so corrupt that democracy is merely a simulation or an illusion, as a permanent political class holds on to its power? And what if you want to challenge all of this? Well, today I'm going to speak to someone who is fighting against all of the above. I'm pleased to have on my program today Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Dr. Ayyadurai is an Indian-born American scientist, engineer, and entrepreneur. Dr. Ayyadurai has been a genuine disruptor, generating controversy by questioning the working conditions of India's largest scientific agency and later the safety of genetically modified soybeans. Dr. Shiva is the author of the book All American Indian. This fight is your fight, the battle to save America from the elites who think they know better. He was an independent candidate in the 2018 United States Senate election in Massachusetts and is currently running for the Republican nomination in 2020. Welcome, Dr. Shiva.
Great to be here, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. As you would have noticed, even in the introduction, I switched between Dr. Shiva, Dr. Ayyadurai. Let's get your name straight. So I see, is it Vellayappa Shiva Ayyadurai? Is that correct?
So here's the deal. In South India, it's an interesting confusion because, the fact that there is a confusion, there's always history to this, because in India, there is no last names, at least in South India.
That's right.
The last name way that you were figured out what family you're part of was they added an initial, sometimes 2 initials, to denote who your father was and your grandfather was. So in the Indian system, it would be VA, Shiva,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But when we came to the United States, you needed a last name.
Yeah.
So my parents took my dad's first name, Ayyadurai, and made it my last name,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My mom is, for example, A. Meenakshi, which is Meenakshi, wife of Ayyadurai, or Meenakshi Ayyadurai. So, so anyway, so I kept both VA Shiva Ayyadurai. Some for just the fact when you write books, it's hard to put Ayyadurai on a book cover.
Yeah.
Some of these are just cosmetic reasons, but the other is that's sort of the origin of it. So if you wanted to blend East and West, it would be VA Shiva Ayyadurai. When we run our campaign to keep it simple for people, we just call it Dr. Shiva.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and people don't realize that in human history, that's been the case. Last names are a recent thing. Like even when the Normans invaded England, that's why people have John Carpenter or Mike Barber, because they only had one name, and then so the Normans just put in the occupation as a last name. But that's
the history of last names. Begins around the same time with the ownership of property.
Correct.
So, for example, if you look at the Native Americans or people like the Dravidians of India, they didn't have last names. Like my grandmother's name is Chinnathai, which means small mother, right?
Right.
Very interesting, right?
Yeah.
But when someone said, I own this piece of land, then they had to create the last name or some way to register whose land that was and who the recipient of that land was.
Right. And I suppose the heirs as well. Yeah.
What's that?
And the heirs as well, I suppose, would have to, to deal with that.
It all started with the ownership of property.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, you've got an amazing story. I mean, just the name itself was interesting. And I mean, to get a handle on it, let's start with the invention of email. Right? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, the invention of email, I did this before I came to MIT. There is no controversy on this. It's actually, in fact, it's not even gray. It's black and white.
Yeah.
And the fact that a controversy was created is what is the controversy.
Yeah.
So the background of this was I was very much interested in medicine, was pretty good at math, but also played sports. I grew up in India, in Bombay, but I also grew up in a small South Indian village.
Okay.
Where my grandmother worked. India has a caste system. So we were considered untouchables. Our job was to essentially pick coconuts from trees.
Okay.
And it's, but some people were quite extraordinary and they broke away from that. My mother being one of them, because she had a very traumatic experience in her life. Her father ran off with the maid. So she, as a young kid, decided that she was going to stand up on her own 2 feet. So this young 8-year-old girl whose father essentially left her and her brothers essentially destroyed the home, she ended up getting a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in math and science at a time when women weren't even supposed to do anything. For that matter, someone from her caste background, when she used to go to the well, they used to shoo her away like she was a pig, she'd say. That's the India she grew up in. My dad grew up in Burma, where my great-grandfather had gone there as an indentured servant. Long before African slavery took place, the first indentured servants, in many ways it was worse life for an indentured servant than a slave, were Indians from parts of India who went to Trinidad, Tobago.
Yeah. My ancestors are also indentured servants.
Etc. So which people forget about this. And then my great-grandfather went through, I remember quite well, did many jobs, made money, and then after World War II lost everything because of the war, came back to India. So my dad actually grew up in Burma, didn't see a book until he was 12 years old, started studying under a mango tree. He found a very good teacher who helped him and ended up becoming one of the leading manufacturing engineers of India, working for one of the big industrialists.
Okay.
My parents were quite extraordinary people. From their backgrounds, they themselves are 1 in a trillion.
Yeah.
The fact that they got together and came to the United States, that itself is another journey. But the point is, I grew up politically aware as a kid, because when I was a kid, I was denied this very rudely awakening experience. I thought I had a friend. I went to his home. His mother forced me to stay outside, wouldn't let me come and give me water in a different bowl.
That was New Jersey?
No, this was in India.
Oh, India. Okay, right.
Yeah, so that's when I was aware of a caste system.
Yeah.
And that's when I got very interested in sort of politics. I think it was sort of embedded in me as a kid, that one singular experience. On the other side, I was very interested in medicine because my grandmother had tattoos all over her arms, was dark as,
Uh-huh.
pitch coal, and was a farmer by day, but on weekends she was a village healer. And she
Okay.
practiced India's traditional system of medicine that she did not go to any university, picked it up on her own from people she learned.
And the tattoos were what?
I
Like
don't
what?
know, man. I
Okay.
don't know. I should have asked her.
Yeah,
You know?
in Trinidad, a lot of the old people have tattoos, and actually it was interesting because it was a lot of the Brahmin, so the upper caste for other listeners. So a lot of the Brahmin women, they had to have a tattoo, or else their husbands wouldn't eat from them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's interesting, that history
Yeah, she
of
had tattoos
tattooing.
all, yeah. So I mean, these were like sort of your modern like wild tattoos. So, but she practiced a traditional system of medicine where she observed your face. She could diagnose particular ailments, and then she would come up with particular formulations for you. So today we call this personalized, precision medicine. But the traditional system of medicine is afforded. Then I saw her empirically heal people. So I was very interested in all of this.
Right.
So in 1970, when my family came to the United States, I was interested in medicine
Okay.
and was pretty good at math. My parents, whatever money they made, they kept moving to the better school system. The first home we stayed in was in a primarily African American neighborhood called Patterson, which is still one of the most poorest cities in the United States. Then to
Mm-hmm.
Clifton, New Jersey, then to Parsippany, and then to Livingston, which is predominantly all white and all
Right.
Jewish.
Okay.
And so it was a very interesting transition because my
Yeah.
parents just kept moving to the better public school systems. Never to private schools. We couldn't afford it. My mom, frankly, didn't like that, that elitism. She had sort of a distaste for that kind of stuff, I think,
Yeah.
with the caste system. So,
Understandably.
by the time I was 14, I'd finished up all my math courses, calculus, which was only given to seniors, 4 years older. I finished up by ninth grade. And then I got this great opportunity to go to New York University because my mom had seen this little clipping in a newspaper that a friend of hers had given her. And the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity was to go to New York to study computer science at Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which
Oh,
is one of the most revered,
yeah.
mathematical sciences institute in the
Because
world.
I actually grew up in Toronto in the
Mhm.
70s and 80s, and I'm not that much younger than you. I was born in 68. Yeah, so it's not that far sociologically. It's almost a different country, but being in a big city, yeah, and I know how things were really different in those days, in those places, and they
Well, in
are today.
1978, a computer filled a huge room.
Yeah, I
And
remember you had the punch cards.
yeah, so I used all those, and the people who used computers were typically men who were
Yeah.
scientists. So it's
And
very
my
restricted.
uncle worked for IBM, and I know that I
Right.
remember they booked time, and they had to
Oh,
do
time
these
sharing.
matrices. Yeah. And so did you have to do all of that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
At 14.
so at 14, you learn how to punch your own cards. So you get to learn organization, etc. So I learned 7 programming languages at NYU, and it was almost like a military Navy SEAL type program. 40 of the best
Okay.
students in the United States were selected. So, I used to get up at 5 in the morning, work until probably, by the time you got home, it was midnight.
Yeah.
And then I graduated top of the class. And then that year,
Were you the
I had some,
youngest?
yeah, I was the youngest kid.
Yeah.
Yep. Because
Yeah.
it was only you had to be a sophomore. I was going from, I'm sorry, it was for juniors and seniors. I was a sophomore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I graduated top of the class. And so my mom is the one who got me into that. And then there was an independent studies teacher who was way ahead of her time. She felt that someone like me, to be constrained, would get bored. So she figured out a way that I could do an independent study project. And
Right.
I only had a few humanities courses left. So I got shuttled to Newark, 30 miles away, and I got a full-time job now.
Mm-hmm.
Initially wasn't paid. I was given free food in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
Later on, I was paid about $1.25 per hour to be a research fellow in a computer, using my skills in math and programming.
Yeah.
Initially, I was doing research on trying to understand why babies were dying in their sleep, called sudden infant death syndrome.
Yeah.
So we had sleep patterns of babies, and I was developing computer algorithms, what you would call AI today,
Yeah.
to look at those sleep patterns to see if I could predict the onset of what's called an apnea when the baby.
By the way, where did you live? You were 14. You were in New York.
So did my parents.
Oh, so they all moved. So your whole
Yes,
family
my
moved.
mom,
Okay, all right.
actually, my dad came first.
Yeah.
We had to wait about a year, then we came.
Yeah.
And my sister. So that was a normal process, right? You had family separation, and no one cried about it, So that happened. And then, so here I'm working in that medical institute, people 30, 40 years older. The guy that hired me said, I will treat you as an equal as long as you are a professional. I said, go with my briefcase. I used to work hard. And then I got involved because they could see I was pretty smart. I could program. I was very hardworking and organized. So they gave me this opportunity of a project. In those days, in most institutions, the way people communicated was with the landline phone. And the other way that you collaborated was through, it was called the inter-office mail system. Now, those big computers in those days, or even early mini computers, had simple ways of doing simple text messaging. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
What I ended up creating, which I'll talk about, but in those days, the way that people communicated was through paper and the typewriter.
Yeah.
And it was a complex system. A secretary, always a woman, would write this. She was always in each of these researchers or doctor's office. Every male had one of these women who was their secretaries. They would dictate to them. They'd write a thing called a memo, which had a particular format. It said memorandum on the top, but a to, a from, a subject line. And then you could CC people. CC literally meant carbon paper between
correct
two people.
Carbon copy.
Carbon copy. Sometimes you did a blind carbon copy. In case you wanted to, let's say, send a request to hire someone and you wanted to BCC your boss. Then you have the body, and then you'd have attachments. That's why you had a paperclip. So if you were going to hire someone, you may send that person's resume out to 20 people where they're supposed to interview. That memo on that attachment would circulate. People would check off as they read it, come back to the original person. And this is how collaboration took place.
That's right.
So I was asked to convert that. It's very complex. You had registered mail, you had archiving, you have folders, you have an address book. This was a complete system. This is the key word, the system. We're not talking about sort of just, pinging messages like military telegraph.
Right.
I was asked to convert that entire system to the electronic version. And I called that system email. Wrote 50,000 lines of code. Worked my butt off. I had to stay awake until 2 a.m. And my customers were these women who I did not see as anyone less than me, who in fact, the doctor said, why do you want to create this email system? I simply like dictating to my secretary. Email was dead on arrival in those people's minds because they had it easy. They just dictated. So anyway, created the system, had every feature that we know what is email today. Called it email, a term never used before.
That's right.
And one of the prestigious Westinghouse Science Honor Awards, which used to be called the Baby Nobles in those days, as a high school student, and then went to MIT. Now you have to understand, no one told me about MIT. I went to an all-white, highly Jewish high school, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, but Jews are brought up to believe they're the chosen people of God.
Yeah, that's correct.
So no one really advised me of a place called MIT, right?
Yeah. I understand what you mean, because I had no idea about the university system growing up too, and it's like accident after accident took me. Right.
So 2 weeks before the applications were due, my mother was always helping people. She had helped these two women. I think one of them had been kicked out by her husband or some issue, and I think my mom felt some sympathy. Met her at the shopping mall, told her and the other woman they could stay at our. They had a little basement, 1-bedroom place, and the women had a friend who came, and he was an interesting guy, and he said, you should go to this place called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He had the brochure, this big dome, and I thought it was a mental institute. It had this feel of something much huge, some sort of impersonal. Anyway, I think a few days before it was due, I applied with a pencil, got accepted, and came begrudgingly, and was really sort of taken aback by how unhealthy a lot of these people looked. These nerds wearing their glasses, carrying their bookcases. I was into sports and athletics, and I didn't want to go. I thought this place was sort of a sick place. My physics teacher, what I didn't know was the high schools got points, if they sent one of their students to a big school. So after I got accepted, then the teachers, for their own self-interest, said, oh, no, you should go there. And one teacher said, you should go there because forget MIT, you like Boston. And I always liked cities growing up in Bombay, et cetera, and it was small enough.
Yeah.
So that's how I got here.
Yeah.
And when I came here in September 2nd, I think it's in the student newspaper, the MIT newspaper, not the student, they listed 3 kids who had done something of some note. And one of was me for inventing this email system.
Right, right.
So I just looked at it very being a good, humble Indian. That winter, as student body freshman president, I was invited to the president of MIT's home. And he said, Shiva, you should copyright this. And he was on President Reagan's scientific advisory board. And he said, it's too bad that the Supreme Court does not recognize software patents. So copyright was the only way to protect software because the 1980 rule, which I didn't know anything about, had amended the US copyright law to use copyright to protect software. In fact, it was this important thing, it was called the Software Act of 1980.
Okay.
So and it wasn't simply putting a C like some of these idiots have said on the internet who are frankly racist and defamatory and want to deny the fact that working class kid in Newark could invent it. It's not only racist, but it's against every working person who works in humble surroundings. So they said, oh, this was just a simple copyright. No, they're idiots. It wasn't a simple copyright. You had to submit all your code. You went back and forth, and I didn't have lawyers. I had to do it on my own. They kept giving me feedback, and this was all my code. So it was made public. So on August 30th, 1982, a kid who grew up in Newark, was born in India, was given the first U.S. copyright for email. So I wrote the code, called it email, had every feature. There's no controversy here, except what got created because I wasn't trained, or I didn't have lawyers like Bill Gates's family, or I didn't have PR people. So it was only, many years later in 2011 and 12, when my mom was dying of a horrible disease, where she had only 3 months to live. She had beautifully saved all my achievements in a suitcase. And she gave that to me 3 months before she died. The editor of Time magazine, the only journalist, by the way, went through everything, Doug Amiff, and he wrote an article called The Man Who Invented Email. And I think he was attacked for doing that. Yeah. Senior technology editor. Then the Smithsonian, which is the National Museum of American History, wanted all my materials. I didn't go seeking it from them. In fact, I was going to donate it to the MIT Museum. Right. They told the Smithsonian this would be us stealing it. And that resulted in the Smithsonian wanting it. So I went down there on February 16, 2012 for a big honor ceremony. My mom had just passed away. And that night, a Washington Post reporter wrote a great article called Shiva Ayyadurai Honored as the Inventor of Email. And that's when the proverbial shit hits the fan, because all these old guard historians, one of them being a guy who was part of an organization which thinks they're the ones who own history, which, by the way, has very close relationships with the military-industrial academic complex, Raytheon, and all these guys. Yeah. So they call me a fraud. How dare this guy say this? Because it was like a new skull was found in Africa. Carter. That's right. Right, and they had already written the history of email. It came from the ARPANET. By the way, the ARPANET guys really didn't. A lot of the stuff on the internet was done by commercial companies like Honeywell and IBM. Right. There's an essay that came out saying how these guys would sit around trying to take credit for everything. Yeah. That's what these guys were about. So how dare I try to take credit for which I legitimately did, because many of them were frauds. Yeah, that's right. So when this went in, it created a huge controversy. I was teaching, I had 4 degrees from MIT, won every other award at MIT. I was on the front page for creating many other things. There was no controversy. In fact, I started a company during 1997 to 2003 where I was called Dr. Email. Right. On the front page of MIT. But when it went into the Smithsonian, it creates a controversy. Okay. Because you perturb the official history. That's right. And so I was called all sorts of names. I was teaching a class at MIT, one of the most popular elective classes. Thousands of letters and calls coming to MIT asking for my termination. Okay. Wow. Okay. It was quite extraordinary. Right. It's not that you were capitalizing on it as such, really. It's really the fact that you were disrupting the official narrative. That was it. Well, the official narrative, as you dwell into this, is the notion that that nothing comes from ordinary working people from places like Newark or wherever, right? That's one piece. Forget the race issue for a second. Yeah. And the second issue is that all great inventions must come from war. That's right. You have to be anointed by the military-industrial academic complex, number 2. the third part of this is that there is a person of color here.
Yeah.
And in the middle, so that happens. People are calling me fraud. I was given extended of a 2-year lectureship. The head of the department, who I had helped in other areas, Doug Laufenberger, says, Shiva, I'm getting a lot of heat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly I get a letter saying, oh, we've decided to change our lecture policy. Okay. But you did amazing work. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm observing all of this. Now you have to understand what these guys didn't know was they had screwed around with the wrong Indian. Okay. Because I wasn't a good Indian.
Yes.
The Indian narrative is Gandhi, who basically sold out his people. Okay. He was part of the not so obvious establishment. He was parachuted in while there were real revolutionaries in India. So I had learned a lot of this. I understood why the caste system happened. What they didn't know for 30 years, in addition to being an inventor and a scientist, I was always a fighter. At MIT, there's a picture of me burning the South African flag on the steps of MIT.
Yeah.
I studied with a guy called Chomsky, who taught me about the fake news media, as we call it today.
Yeah.
Right. I had started a newspaper on campus called The Student. I didn't go and join the existing newspaper. We created our own and we raised hell. I had written a series of articles exposing Monsanto. I was in the middle of doing that. I had gone to India 3 years before this, exposed corruption in the Indian government under death threats, had to leave, and wrote an important paper called Innovation Demands Freedom. So they were looking at a veteran fighter.
Yeah.
The only problem was I had never fought for myself, which is a very interesting personal journey. Mm-hmm. So it's easy, frankly, to fight for others, but when you have to say, wait a minute, but I had to put the hat on, Kirk, that I wasn't fighting for me, but for that 14-year-old boy who did invent email, and for all the other people who do great innovations outside the bastions of big universities, the military and big corporations.
For them, you're rogue. You can't be controlled. Yeah.
Well, Philo Farnsworth was a young boy, 14-year-old boy, similar circumstances. He created the first TV, okay? And he went through 60 years, and now there's a statue of him in Washington. The point is he didn't have the race issue, but he did it outside of the realm of the military-industrial complex or the military-industrial academic complex. RCA stole stuff from him, mm-hmm. And he fought a 20-year, 19-year Supreme Court battle. He ended up winning. But there's only 1 year patent life left. In my case, it's two issues. A, it was done before I came to MIT, and B, it was done by a dark-skinned Indian guy. Yeah. And Indian guys can shake their heads and maybe write software, but they do not get the credit for being great inventors. And proof of that, to anyone who, whether you're left or right, doesn't believe there's racism, there is. And there's real racism, not the racism that the white liberals talk about. Yeah. I'm talking about the fact that in the middle of this controversy in 2014, the so-called esteemed Walter Isaacson, who wrote Bill Gates's book, he jumps in and writes a book called Innovators of the Digital Revolution. It was a propaganda piece. Yeah. Innovators of the Digital Revolution. And you go through the book, it's all white guys. Yeah. Okay? Not one person of color. Yeah. And he leaves out email. Mm-hmm. Okay? Talking about the digital revolution, email's left out of it. Exactly. And he ascribes, great innovation to the military-industrial complex, the golden triangle. Yeah. So, and that dark-skinned 14-year-old Indian kid doesn't fit that. Now, the problem I had was when I was at MIT, I was part of that military-industrial complex. Yeah. And they liked me. They put me on the front page when I first came. They put me on the front page of Technology Review. They put me on the front page when I won my Fulbright because I was being a good Indian then, you say? Mm-hmm. I totally understand. Yeah. Yeah. Meeting their needs for quote-unquote inclusivity and diversity. But when you said email was done before I came here, that blows up their narrative that you have to go there and be anointed by them. And that there's a lot of smart people in this world, black and white and brown and yellow and all these people who grew up in humble surroundings and who do not get the credit they deserve. And the credit is important. It's not ego. The credit is important because it talks about where does innovation originate? And what is innovation? Innovation is ultimately an expression of the human spirit, which is innovation is in everyone's DNA. Yeah. And the thought that only a finite set of people who go to MIT or Silicon Valley can innovate is frankly dehumanizing. That's right. And it's about knowledge creation, about the guarding what is acceptable knowledge and who produces. And it's very much related to the stuff you're doing about it's climate change. The United States has a caste system. The world has a caste system. Yep. And that is probably a good thing to transition to academia. Academia, following the 1970s in the United States, became a caste system. Lots of money moved from a time when you could do basic research to the National Science Foundation, other institutions where innovation was choked. Academia essentially became an institution for salespeople. There are great scientists, but in 1970 there was a passage of the Mansfield Amendment, which moved lots of money out of basic sciences research to the NSF, which is a very political organization.
Yeah.
So between 1970 and now, they literally culled out all the really radical people who went into academia to speak their mind, have freedom of speech, and it's essentially become a model for a lot of lemmings.
Yeah.
People who toe the line,
Yeah.
who believe in scientific consensus, and this
Yeah.
is how Jeffrey Epstein was able to survive, because most of these people are so enamored that a guy like Epstein would come and pay homage to them,
Yeah.
invite them to their island, make them feel like something, because most of them, like the Hollywood celebrities, are highly narcissists, are very insecure about their capabilities, because many of them are not that capable. They're mediocre at best.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that. I'll just go off on a little tangent because you were kind of connected in a way to that, because you were, was it married to Fran Drescher or?
Yeah, so the interesting thing was, I had this experience. I've been in these large institutions, the Indian caste system. Went to India for 3 years, participated in the Indian Scientific Institution, been at MIT, the Military Industrial Academic Complex, I've been in the Center of Innovation. And then I had a great experience where Fran and I hooked up. I was in Hollywood for 3 years and saw sort of this very interesting dichotomy there among the very few people, really great actors who hone their craft.
You were working there? You had a business there? What was it?
No. I actually was, Fran and I, were in our relationship. So I was flying back and forth actually, because I still had my businesses here and I was living out in Malibu.
Okay.
But my point is, you find that there's, because of the notion of how Hollywood is organized, there's celebrities and then there's actors. It's almost like an academic and a scientist.
Right.
The former is very insecure, doesn't really know whether they have the chops. An actor or a scientist, works very hard and has their chops, right? But there's few of them because of the gamesmanship you have to play to survive in a Hollywood, right?
Yes.
So I saw this very interesting dynamic there. I ended up becoming pretty good friends with Keely Brosnan and her husband Pierce, who I just did a movie that Pierce produced called Poisoning Paradise, which is really about the destruction that's occurred to the island of Kauai by big agrobiotech. Keely likes to say, Shiva, you're the star of the movie. I'm the main scientist in the movie, but it's a great movie. It's on iTunes.
Okay.
But it really talks about political movements, how people have fought on the ground, how the judges have actually are corrupt. It's a great movie, but it shows it's an integration of science and politics.
Yeah.
And medicine,
Yeah.
But to me, I feel like I'm very fortunate because this was sort of what I was thrown into,
Yeah. And that's interesting that you because I've seen you talk about the idea of scientific consensus versus a scientific method. And I mean, as someone basically from your generation, I mean, it's an amazing shift, because when we were young and taught about science, it was like Galileo versus the world. It was like one man who knew the truth, and the consensus was that the world was flat, or that the sun went around the earth, and it was through the scientific method and the individual human mind that challenged everything, that's how science progresses. And now it's like, what? This is a consensus. 98% of scientists believe this. It's the total opposite of science as we knew it. And I mean, you take this up in so many.
I mean, what's happened is, I think humanity, every one of us on our personal lives and on a large scale, has to choose this path of truth, freedom, and health, or power, profit, and control. And I think this is constantly taking place, this dialectic, right?
Yeah.
Do you want truth? Do you want freedom? Do you want health? In order to have truth, you have to have freedom of discourse, open debate, and that leads so the scientific method can reveal itself and emerge to find truth. And from truth, you're actually able to focus on real problems and find real solutions. And from that, you can innovate and get health, right? The other thing is it's driven by control, which is what academia likes. Academics, some of them don't make a lot of money, but they want control.
Yeah.
And then you bring profit in, and then you bring in power, right? So these are sort of those three dynamics.
And this is what you
And I think
observed in
this is
Hollywood between the celebrities and the actors, and in academia, correct?
academia, the academic and the scientist, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
celebrity and, you know, the statesman, activist and revolutionary versus a career politician, right? The citizen statesman versus a career politician.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this
yeah.
dynamic has always been going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we as humans have chipped away at it. You know, it goes up and down, and we went from completely being slaves and completely then being serfs and now being wage slaves. And it's an onward struggle. It doesn't mean it just goes upward. It can go
Yeah,
backward too.
that's
Everyone
right.
thinks, oh, we keep improving. So we have an interesting situation now in the world because with that Mansfield Amendment, where so much money got consolidated in the NSF and it became a political organization, what's ended up happening is we're starting to move towards scientific consensus.
Yes,
So
definitely.
there's a guy called Chuck Schumer as a senator, Nancy Pelosi's comrade in the Senate.
Yeah.
He's put forward a bill, I think it's called Bill 791, which basically says there will be no more discourse on climate change by any government agency, or no funding will go to them because there's scientific consensus.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
on climate change. So when you that is very similar to the edicts that led to the Council of Trent against Galileo. It's not that different.
That's
so
right.
The word scientific consensus / science is settled. When we did our research using some of the new technology I created, exposed that there are no safety assessment standards for genetically engineered foods, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You take climate change, you know, there's a video I did, I think, which went viral. I think it's got over close to 1 million impressions, 600,000 views, without, you know, any major one individual person retweeting. It's just been organic.
Yeah.
It literally takes a systems perspective, and it shows how, you know, the Paris Accords has nothing to do with lowering pollution. In fact, it increases pollution. And it really is a way to get, you know, every man, woman, and child paying for carbon use. And a finite set of people are going to get very, very, very wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, as an environmentalist from this, you know, from the 70s with that consciousness, we used to talk about air pollution, water pollution, you know, landfills, resource uses, and the corporations were like the enemy. Now nobody talks about that. And it's about carbon, which is life. It's about carbon dioxide.
Right. And what's interesting is if you go to Monsanto's website, the single corporation who probably has done more to pervasively just, you know, dirty the air, dirty the water, dirty our food, you know, they're dirty, dirty, dirty. They promote climate change.
Yeah.
Right. So in fact, even the big oil companies promote climate change. So
Correct.
A lot of these activists say, because of big oil companies, it's a great PR move. You know, BP changes their logo. They know fossil fuels are going to be around. There's no way to get rid of that overnight. But they do this to manipulate people.
Yeah.
Because they win PR-wise big time.
Yeah.
And now the reality is, Kirk, there is a real climate change taking place. So what's happened is the academics always promote a fake problem and a fake solution.
Yeah.
The fake problem is CO2. Well, and they created models of climate which are completely bogus. They're indeterminate at best. It's a complete fraud. It's a complete hoax. But we are missing the fact that the Earth does undergo major changes.
Yeah.
And there may be some major grand solar changes. There may be, I mean, they call it a cycle, right? Cosmic rays.
Yeah.
And the use of clouds in many of these models is highly underestimated.
Yeah.
So clouds, 2 droplets of water, in order to nucleate, you need a particle, right?
Yeah.
But when you have more higher cosmic rays, you have a solar minimum, and then you also have more pollution in the air. You can, in fact, create, like what took place in the Midwest of the United States, sudden floods.
Right.
So we could have extreme weathers, but that doesn't have to do. We have to lower pollution to address that.
Exactly.
And so instead of that, they're deviating to this nonsense of CO2 being a pollutant, which will have minor effects, if any, when you look at the scales on this.
Yeah.
And it's a way fundamentally to increase taxes on working people.
Yeah.
And why do they want to do that? If you go to a very fundamental reason, I can talk about in Massachusetts, these people are so corrupt, and corruption always manifests itself in infrastructure.
Right.
You know, construction and corruption sort of go hand in hand.
Correct.
Okay?
Yep.
And politicians. So if you look at Massachusetts, is noted as a third worst crumbling infrastructure in the entire United States by the American Society of Civil Engineers. And this is where MIT and Harvard are, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Third worst. So in a little small couple of mile radius, good infrastructure, but screw everyone else. People find it very difficult to travel here. So you're making infrastructure really difficult, which means you increase the cost of doing business, which means people can't pay people as well, which means you get depressed salaries, lower wages. If you invest in infrastructure, right, you basically solve many problems. You're going for the long. $1 in infrastructure returns $6 in return. Businesses can work faster and better. Their workers can go to work faster and easier, more wages, and you save. But they don't want to do that because they've created an environment of so much corruption. Their infrastructure is so bad. So their only way out of it is to create fake problems so they can tax people.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, one of the goals is to have a carbon tax on property tax. Now, all of this is being done because they cannot destroy corruption because they're part of the corruption.
Yeah.
So the goal is to layer in more taxes. So that's what's fun. So if you look at it, it's quite easy to understand what's going on. They have created a machinery that is moving so slow. You know, in Germany and Canada, you can building projects get done in 2 years, including the permitting.
Right.
In the United States, it takes 10 years because it's not even money. You can put a lot of fuel into this engine, but it's so stuck.
Yeah.
Because of the permitting process. There's so much corruption and so much inefficiency and so much things that have never been addressed that it takes 10 years. So I think about 10 years ago, $800 billion was allocated to, you know, infrastructure.
Yeah.
And after 10 years, only 50 billion was dispersed.
Right. Right.
So you can't even get the money out because of the level of, you know, friction in the entire environment.
So let's bring this to your political career, and so because it's quite interesting, and I love it because it's a theme that I come to over and over again with people I've been speaking to. You know, it's like obliterating the conventional left and right distinctions, which are meaningless.
Or the other way to look at it is uniting.
That's right.
People.
Exactly.
It's uniting people around real problems and real solutions.
Yeah.
And part of our campaign is, you know, I'm a scientist and an inventor and a fighter, and I'm one of you, and I'll win for you. You know, I grew up with working class people. I grew up as an untouchable in India.
Yeah.
You know, you have this idiot Kennedy running. You know, they have nice photographers. They take pictures of brown folks and poor white folks and homeless. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so I hope I get to run against him because it'll be the untouchable versus the aristocrat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who the only experience he has is to name only. He went to a homeless center. They didn't allow us to go in because it was all a photo shoot.
Yeah.
When he comes out, I asked him, I said, hey, Joe, what do you have to say by the fact that Massachusetts has the highest increase in homelessness, 15 to 18% more than any other state? And his response was, I don't know anything about that. Yet he had just gone in seconds before and taken these nice pictures, concerned pictures, of homeless people. So these people are complete frauds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happened with the Trump election, people are now open to realize that maybe it's okay to fight for their own interests.
Yeah.
And that's a big journey for people to do. Like I had to take the journey to fight for my own interest to, you know, take the credit for email, which I did do.
Yeah.
Everyday people are not narcissists. They're not out there to get credit. They're just trying to, you know, be good. So it takes a big leap of faith when you have to fight for yourself. And only after years and years and years of oppression do people decide to fight. And I think my theory is the election in Massachusetts 2020 is going to be the most important election for the entire world. And let me tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Because Boston and Massachusetts, and I can tell you the longitude and the latitude is the location between MIT and Harvard, is the center of the deep state. Every major economic collapse you can probably trace to some Harvard or MIT professor.
Yeah.
You know, the two, frankly, idiots who won the Nobel Prize in economics are two people who basically have come up with nonsensical ways to use poor people and to justify poverty to some extent.
Absolutely.
And they're actually figuring out ways how to sell stuff into poverty-stricken people. That's what they actually did.
Absolutely.
How to give people more drugs, how to give people all the things that they don't need. And that's what they were handsomely rewarded.
The whole fake IMF World Bank thing that they've been trying to fight poverty for 80 years and haven't succeeded at all. Yeah.
Well, there's no need to fight poverty. It's basically to use people as pawns. But if you look at what's going on, Massachusetts, or Boston, when my school teacher said it was the Athens of the world, every innovation or policy is first tested out here, and then it's rolled out to other parts of the United States. Massachusetts, for example, is the #1 most vaccinated state, right? Think about it, #1. So everything is tested here. The guy, Jonathan Gruber, who should be in jail, who created the Obama healthcare policy out of MIT and then gloated how people are dumb. He said it in a meeting, MIT guy, right? Yeah. You can trace all of the deep state's theoreticians and intellectual capital right here. Mm-hmm. And so my winning would basically freak them out, and it would send a shockwave more than even the Trump election.
Now you started out as an independent in...
No. So I don't care. So let me tell you my background.
Yeah.
I don't care for either party. When I was 18 or 19, I've always been an anti-establishment guy because I figured out how the caste system worked as a kid. Yeah. And in 1984, there was a guy called Jesse Jackson, a complete sellout, who was talking a good game, running on the Rainbow Party against a Democrat and a Republican. At the last minute, he gives all of his votes to Walter Mondale on the thesis of lesser of two evils. He probably got paid off on the back end for doing that. So that's when I realized in all political movements, there's the establishment, those who have power. Everyday people want significant change, but don't know how to do it or don't have the time. Yeah. And then you have a third, more insidious element called the NSOE, the not so obvious establishment. Mm-hmm. These are the people who, in a period of unfortunate cycle, manipulate people, talk a good game, talk the rhetoric, but are essentially used as a funnel to funnel people back into the establishment. That's what Jesse Jackson did. Right. Gandhi
kind of like controlled opposition in a sense.
Gandhi did that in India. Mm. India should have had a good revolution. It should have kicked out the British, like what happened here.
Yeah. Bose is. I would imagine you like Subhash Chandra Bose.
Well, there were others even besides Subhash Chandra Bose. There were people on the ground, people's names we don't even know, who were doing grassroots movements.
Absolutely.
And those people were nullified because Gandhi was pushed on the masses. Great PR move. Yeah. And essentially was used to suck out the energy of mass movements or divert it, because they knew the Indians were into mass movements. And essentially, as I mentioned before, white men with crowns left and brown men with white hats took over. Yeah. And that systemic corruption sustained India until you could argue Modi's election was a disruption.
Yeah.
He didn't come from the Gandhi hierarchy. So that's what's so when Bernie Sanders ran, right?
Yeah.
People said you should vote for him. I said, look, he's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did. He'll give all of his votes to Hillary Clinton, and no one believed me, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So right now, so when Trump won, I was watching him very carefully, and even on the debate stage, he never stopped attacking both parties.
Yeah.
So I realized this guy doesn't care, which is awesome. So that's, I don't care if he passes any bills. I don't care if he doesn't even do any legislation.
Yeah.
There's 100 people like him because the corruption is so deep.
That's right.
And so when he ran, I registered as an independent. Mm-hmm. Then I went to his inauguration and then decided I was going to run as a Republican. But the Massachusetts Republican Party here is sort of the center of the deep state. They are the old British who never left.
Right. The Republican, not the Democrats?
No. You have to listen. The Massachusetts, the epicenter the Democrats and Republicans become like this. Yeah. Right. In other states, it could be a little bit separated, but remember, this is a center of the deep state. They're actually one here.
Yeah.
So for example, when I announced...
And if you don't mind me interjection, because I was there a couple of years ago and making my observation, like the Boston elite was called the Boston Brahmins. Exactly. The Boston Tea Party, the East India Company. That was against the East India Company. Here. Yeah, the American flag is the East India Company flag, if you're not aware of that. And and most of the old wealth out of Boston was connected to the East India Company and through the trade with China. Which is the one
that raped India.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and China pushed opium in China. Yeah, so this is interesting what you're talking about here.
Right, so what happened here was the remember Britain was fighting two war fronts, right?
Yeah.
They were fighting India, trying to maintain the empire there. So, and then, they were also on another war front in 1776 here, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, I think 1757 is when the Battle of Plassey took place in India.
Correct.
When the British became occupiers there. So here in the United States, when the British lost here, they didn't just get up and leave.
Yeah.
They didn't like Exodus. They essentially embedded themselves where? In Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts, you could argue, is the center of the counter-revolution because after every great revolution, there's a counter-revolution. It doesn't just end in days or months or weeks, right?
Yeah.
Or decades. It continues. So the epicenter of that counter-revolution is also here. That's why you look at it, the governor here is a Republican, hates Trump.
Yeah.
The other former governor, who's the mentor of the current governor, a Republican, hates Trump, and he's running against him.
Yeah.
And the former governor endorsed Joe Kennedy, who's a Democrat, a Republican, knows that I'm running.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what's wonderfully great to observe about this, it's not Republicans versus Democrats.
That's right.
It's the aristocracy versus everyday working people.
That's right.
And they are more fearful of someone like me winning because I know how they operate.
Yeah.
I've gotten all their education and they don't know what to do with me, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be, but I stand for working people. Those are who my people are. And they know I can articulate, I can talk, I can discern. So it's going to be a good election. So, but I would argue with all humility, the Senate election of 2020 in Massachusetts, winning that would send a shockwave not only in Massachusetts, but not only in the United States, across the world.
Yeah.
Because there's, it's really cast. That's what this election is going to be about.
Yeah. That's what I observed that, since Sarah Palin, for example, because they want to know what newspaper she read. They made fun of her accent. I mean, she was not from, I mean, you could hate Sarah Palin, you could whatever, but the thing was she was not of the cast, right? So so Saturday Night Live and Tina Fey, they all made fun of her. She didn't go to the right schools. She had so many children, all this sort of stuff. They just
they're elites. They're elites.
Yeah.
White, liberal, now it's a multiracial aristocracy of snobs.
Yeah.
So our campaign, Kirk, is bringing together people who've never had a voice. We have Republicans and Democrats and independents and people who typically did not vote, come out because in me, they see themselves, they see a real person.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to be extraordinarily good about this election. And they see in me not a guy who just suddenly wanted to fight for them. I've been fighting all my life. I've been creating all my life. I've been doing science all my life. And I know how to expose these guys all my life. It's been sort of a thing I've enjoyed. I've become a veteran of it.
So I'm very interested in, in how the campaign is going. I saw you had a picture with Donald Trump Jr. the other day.
So it's interesting. So so the trends that are going on right now is you have the Trump phenomenon, right? Which is basically anti-establishment, right?
Yeah.
And he basically is, in my view, basically they're alone in a lot of ways. He's smart because he goes among people and connects every day. He hasn't forgotten his base. And that's what's enabling him to survive in many ways.
Yeah.
So I was invited to speak at this thing called AmpFest, which is sort of Trumpers, which is a good thing. I met some interesting people there. Separate from that, on the ground here, we're building a great ground movement. Mm-hmm. We don't expect anything from the mainstream media. Yeah. We probably won't even give any interviews to the mainstream media.
Right.
Because we know whatever you say, they're going to twist anyway.
That's right.
So we will likely have a policy of not giving interviews to the mainstream media. We will give interviews to, independent media only. Mm-hmm. And that's a policy that we've taken. When I run, part of the things I will only run for one term, period. My goal is to leave a legacy of, educating 1,000 other people like me who are interested and fostering statesman-like and fighting quality so they can run afterwards versus trying to be in there forever. Okay. The problem is a career politician gets in there the day that they arrive, 80 to 90% of their time is spent getting elected. So if you have a 6-year term, that means you're spending 5.4 years getting elected. And the other 0.6 years, right?
Yeah.
To pass legislation because you need money. In my case, the thesis is, okay, imagine working 100% for people, which means I'm going to be 5 times more of a senator than the guy who's in there, spending all this time trying to get influence, etc.
Right.
In that model, we're going to go in there
Yeah.
with a very different model, which is to raise hell.
Yeah.
And to make sure policies which need to be done get implemented. So, for example, in healthcare,
Yeah.
there's a corrupt policy which incentivizes middlemen who remove and extract $500 billion in costs, called GPOs and PBMs. They were given this right in 2000 by an act, and we called the Safe Harbor Act. So, number one is to repeal that act. Number two, for big tech censorship, the United States Postal Service is a vehicle that needs to get into the digital world, and they can really enforce a whole new way of digital freedom.
All right.
Start looking at student loans, $1.8 trillion in student loans. The universities are using the students as collateral. They take their loan money and then they invest it. They make millions, billions on the stock market. The student loan companies have this student as indentured servitude.
That's an amazing analysis. I've not heard.
So there's a video I did on this, and more interestingly, so there's a solution. Every one of these, we find the real problem and the real solution. The real solution is the university.
You followed the money. You see, that's always the thing. Yeah.
So in that model, the university should co-sign the student loans.
Right.
So what that means now is, if you're a student that you marketed, you said how great our university is a failure, and he can't pay back even his loans, that means you're going to pay it. Which means now you've created the incentive model that university should make sure he gets skills, properly give guidance to that person. Hey, you probably don't want to take that course on the anthropology of aardvarks. Whatever. I'm not saying anything against aardvarks, because you're never going to get a job. Do that as a hobby, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you should learn how to do engineering or plumbing or being an electrician. So universities would be forced to do that, and you also tax their endowments, which they're running as hedge funds at the 20% rate. So for each one of these, we actually have a real solution to a real problem. The career politician will never come up with these solutions, because first, they're not interested. They're just puppets.
And they're funded by these things as well.
Well, they exist to basically, they're part of the, not so obvious, or these obvious establishments. So it's going to be a fun election.
Yeah.
But we're not relying on anyone in power to help us. We're not, if someone wants to take a picture with us, give an interview, we'll look at it. But it's basically recognizing the ends cannot justify the means.
Yeah.
The means and the ends have to be in resonance throughout the process.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that you've been doing on the campaign, and I've been watching, you had your little you had a wager about climate change, saying, listen, was it $1 million or was it more?
I said I'd give him my $10 million building. No one took it,
Right.
If they can show. Last year, we're the ones that we hit Warren really hard. Only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. It has nothing to do with race. Yeah. It has to do with the hypocrisy of their racism, because Warren used race to get advancement. That's racism.
Yeah.
And this is why the multiracial liberal elite have defined racism in a very stupid way. Don't use the N word, right?
Yeah.
Don't say this or that. Then they feel good for themselves. But they don't want to address the fact that they are the racists.
That's right.
The problem with the Republican Democrat is that the Democrats have owned racism, and the Republicans don't want to talk about racism. But there is racism. But it's not the racism of the liberal elite. Yeah. It's the racism of using race to manipulate people. So when you call someone a white nationalist and someone a black nationalist, that's racism.
Yeah.
When you demean someone of the white working class, that's racism. When you demean, you have income inequality where the average net worth of a black person in Massachusetts is $8, and that of a white person living in Back Bay, which is where all the liberal elites live, is $250,000. That's racism. And Elizabeth Warren saying that she was a Native American Indian to get her job, that's racist. And that's why when we put the headdress on her, they go crazy. They get triggered, because it's not the headdress, because we're actually putting their face on their own racism.
Exactly, because she used it, for her advantage. I mean, I always myself, came up against it, because like in Trinidad, where my family is from and where I eventually came back to and lived and so forth, the way we talk about race is very open, very politically incorrect by standards, in the US and Canada. And
Same in New York, where Trump grew up.
yeah,
People use words that people think are racist,
yeah.
but they're not.
Yeah, but we have, you know, so it's like with the whole disability thing, because that's the way Trinidadians are. Like they'll make fun of someone about how dark you are, about how your face looks, about how fat you are, all this stuff. But they're not socially ostracizing you because you're still part of like their group, and so it's, but they're not going to pretend they're not seeing these things, and they might, you know, make a little joke, but there's no, whereas I found, like, you know, with the pristine prim sort of white liberal thing, you know, here if you use
By the way,
word,
I used to call it white liberal. Now I call it a multi-racial liberal aristocracy.
I love, yeah,
It includes the Obamas, right? It
that's
includes,
right. You know,
a whole, but it's a multi-racial liberal
and
aristocracy.
you're right. It's a total caste system, because it's
Yep.
about the words you use, your social circle, and it's about signaling to these people, because in your own social group, you don't have people from all these so-called marginal groups unless they're anointed somehow, or there's some kind of token.
Or unless they're a toy you use to promote some agenda, right?
That's right. That's right.
You elevate some kid up, and you have a nonprofit promoting something.
That's right.
Or you talk about it in some terms that actually support some other agenda, but it's not anything sincere by and large.
And I know you're running as a Republican, but you know, you're really coming, you know, from
it's like you're driving a Chevy or a Ford.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a driver that matters. We ran as independents just to give you how successful we were in spite of all the nonsense.
Yeah.
We got 100,000 votes, which means those 100,000 people voted for us. They got over the lesser of two evils nonsense.
Yeah.
They got over any smear that they tried to throw at us, right? And they came to us. Those were very conscious people who went out and voted.
Yeah.
The last time someone got 100,000 votes as an independent Massachusetts was never. The closest someone got was 20,000 votes, and that guy was allowed on the debate stage.
Right.
If I had gotten on the debate stage, not only would I have won, but I would have probably destroyed the entire notion of what it means to be a politician. And that's why they didn't put, and we had to file a federal lawsuit, but it was too late.
Yeah.
So this time we're going to run as an R, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the Republicans on the ground who knew that the Republicans screwed us,
yeah,
very appreciative of my running.
Yeah.
They remember the fake Indian, real Indian campaign.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on, Kirk. So we're going to run
and what's interesting is that, I mean, because you mentioned Trump, and I agree with you, and it was amazing when he was on stage, the stuff he was saying. I never thought I'd hear a U.S. president saying this. And then, but now you have some other people, like, I think Tulsi has been great. I don't think she's like a Bernie, like what you've talked about. And Andrew Yang, I think, is interesting. But I know I've seen you've had some really critical things of Tulsi that are extremely valid, very valid.
Here's the thing: she's attacked. I met Tulsi. You know, I like her as a person, but the thing is, her politics is not consistent. Because if you're going to go attack Hillary Clinton, you should attack Obama, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He was also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, okay?
Yeah.
Besides the military-industrial complex thing, which, you know, here's the thing with the not-so-obvious establishment. They're very clever at picking up something that sounds good, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, but then you have to look at the litmus test. Are you, because she also said she will support whatever Democratic candidate is finally selected, okay?
Yeah.
So these things do not tell me that she's truly anti-establishment, okay?
Yeah.
Because how would you support Joe Biden? The guy's completely corrupt. How would you support Elizabeth Warren? She's completely corrupt, right? So the issue is,
that's why Trump's answer was so good when they asked him, well, if you didn't get the nomination, he said, well, we'll see. You know, and everyone,
but you don't see that. So when, you know, I think Tulsi's part of the not so obvious establishment. Remember, these guys get clever and clever and clever.
Yeah.
Whether she knows it explicitly or implicitly, but that's what she is, because she, you know, you have to attack all of these guys. You have to expose them. Obama, why? How come he's left out?
Yeah.
You know, he's the one who brought in Hillary Clinton. They're part of a machine, and that machinery is what needs to be attacked. And the Democratic Party is part of that machine. I mean, even though I'm running as a Republican, I go after the leaders of the Republican Party because there's a disconnect between this party machinery and everyday work, whether there are or a D or an I. And if you don't recognize that, you are basically supporting the machinery, in my view.
Yeah.
And Andrew Yang's UBI is basically a way of getting people to vote for him, right?
Yeah.
He's not addressed the systemic issues. He's promoting climate change, which is nonsense. Okay. So these people are not addressing the core issues.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I still like about Trump is he goes after the establishment. You know, he has to do whatever the hell he has to do to survive. He probably doesn't know who the hell's on his side. You know, maybe he's got a couple of people. But in my view, what he's doing is a disruptive need, like in a big chemical reaction.
Yeah.
You have to have this catalyst come in there to just completely vaporize things.
Yeah.
And then it can move to a different, you know, state.
Yeah.
So that's his role in history. And I think history will see that he was a necessary disruptive force that was essentially keeping people in mental slavery and all sorts of type of, you know, fossilizing how they thought about the world.
And I'm very interested in the fact that you said that you want to just be one term. And because I thought that perhaps this is building up to, you know, maybe, you know, people go for, it's a career path. They go to the Senate and then seek the presidential nomination.
I have a, you know, I run a company. I've created a new technology. That can model every major disease. You know, I have a big talk I have to give at the National Science Foundation. I still give, you know, I'm still a full-time scientist.
Right.
I'm doing this because I'm a systems guy. And I see this, like the founders of this country, where they're very smart people. It wasn't separate. Politics wasn't different than, you know, figuring out other things like Franklin and Jefferson did, or architecting stuff. So this is just an area I know I can contribute to, and people deserve someone like me.
Yeah.
And they also deserve to see that, have a standard of what a really good statesman looks like. It's like if you eat crap food all your time, and then one day you have really good food and you feel great, you know, you say, oh, that's what good food is. People haven't had a sense of what it means to really have a statesman, you know, and a fighter, you know, and someone who can solve problems. And they deserve that. And that's what I will offer to them. My victory will give people a sense of, you know, what you deserve. It'll raise the standard. And that's what it's fundamentally about.
What's your campaign message then? What's your main campaign message right now?
Our core message is, it's very simple. Who are you electing? So part of it is who, is you're getting a scientist, inventor, and a fighter. I'm one of you, you know, I'll win for you. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to win for you by uniting us around real problems and innovating real solutions, period. Because you have fake problems, fake solutions. And you take any issue nowadays, gun violence. There are 5 things which cause gun violence, not just weapons. 4 other things. It was done in a very interesting multifactorial study. And if you remove any one of them, you can end gun violence, not just guns. You know, the bullying independently. If you look at all these kids who did these rampages, they had all 5 things going on.
Right.
But they always focus on one of them.
Yeah.
And that's the Second Amendment. So now you're purposely setting up to divide people. Why not focus on the bullying? Why not focus on the surveillance, which didn't take place? They don't want to do that. On the vaccine issue, the real issue is to create resilient immune systems, but they make it a pro-vax, anti-vax argument.
Yeah.
You say pro-climate, anti-climate. Well, the unifying issues, we need to lower pollution. In any one of these issues, those in power want to divide people when there are actually real problems and there's a real solution. Right. So we're going to show, look, when you take a systems approach, when you look at it like a working person, where you're not being, you know, if you don't solve a problem, you don't get your customer coming back. That's the attitude like an electrician takes, or a plumber takes, or a small business person. When you take that approach, you don't have time to sort of screw around. What is a real issue? You need to lower pollution. That's a real issue. There's no benefit to the Paris Accords. No, you ask them, tell me one benefit. Nothing. There is no benefit. Tell me one benefit to telling people they can't have guns. Well, you're going to create people pissed off they can't have guns. But you know what? The real benefit is that in schools, you know, the teachers are looking the other way.
Yeah.
When there was a kid with a serious problem, and every one of those issues, the kid was being bullied.
That's right.
So if you look at all, and someone looked the other way, well, why not go focus on that?
Yeah.
But they don't want to do that because they want to always speak. Look, it's when I grew up in India, in a village. I don't know if you know this. Politicians in India use a technique called communalism. You could go to a village and you could say your curry sucks.
Yeah.
People are they're into what they make. I mean, it's going to sound like a weird thing. Or Indians and Muslims lived together for many years in neighborhoods for a long time. But you could go say something against a Hindu or something against a Sikh, and you could right away spark a riot and get those people to vote for you. Yeah. That's what these guys do. So they take an issue and they know, oh, okay, there's a lot of people who are against the Second Amendment. I'm going to create that dialectic. You see?
Yeah.
So what they do is they don't want to unify people because they want to create division, and they're going to be the saviors of a false division.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what politicians do. Working people, we don't have time for this. Politicians, this is the only time they have because they have no other skills or jobs.
That's right. That's right.
They take advantage of the situation, and they're fronted by other people who make a shitload of money, excuse my language, right, in that process.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's the same thing. I mean, it's a global system. You know what I mean? And you find it in everything. I mean, it's quite amazing. I'm so supportive of your campaign. I'm just blown away by all the stuff you're doing. It's unreal.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the best thing people can do is to go for Shiva for Senate. You know, if you're in the United States, you can give us $1, $5. If you can't give money, volunteer for the campaign. Right. Tell others about it. Retweet us on social media. If you want to help us on the ground here, you're welcome to. Great. But that's how we win. And our campaign is about winning for you. People deserve someone like them. You know, they don't deserve a Joe Kennedy or someone who's been in the guy called Ed Markey, who's been in the Senate for 40 years. They deserve someone who doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
They deserve someone who's going to go work, is going to, work really hard for 6 years, with some clear mission, with deadlines, and leave. And during that 6-year process, imagine 10,000 other young people being inspired and educated to run office.
I mean, I know I kept you longer than I said, but tell me about that. I think that's so important. How do you plan to inspire these? What was it? 1,000 or 10,000 other leaders?
Well, one of my goals is, imagine in 6 years you have 10,000 young people inspired. There's a great guy called William Fulbright.
Yeah.
He was a Democrat senator, but he was the one who coined the term military-industrial academic complex.
Right.
Eisenhower, a Republican, called it military-industrial complex. But he did this great program where he felt that if people traveled, it would, create a global view of themselves. Yeah. So he created the Fulbright program, right? Mm-hmm. I'd like to create a similar program for leadership, where you're encouraging people in many areas to participate in governance, not like the Kennedys, right? Yeah. Or this, a plumber, an electrician, a nurse, an engineer, the typical people who don't. The people who are actually solving problems every day. And so,
which is like the original democracy, because there wasn't elections in Greek democracy. You drew lots, and you just
right. Yeah. So that's the way it's supposed to be. But what's happened is, and we've learned a lot about how to run these campaigns. We've built some technologies and tools that we can share with people, and how to, very basic stuff. So, what's really great about running a campaign, I actually see so many interesting innovations we could create. It's just another field for innovation.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's amazing. I want to thank you so much for the interview. It's just awesome, but not only for the interview, for your work, your determination over the years, your organizational skills, your intelligence, your vision. I mean, what you're doing is so important, and I wish you and your campaign all the best and every success in your struggles ahead.
Thanks a lot, Kirk. And people should remember, this is their campaign.
Yeah.
My winning is their winning. Because it's really about time people got someone that really represents them and will fight for them, and the Senate platform, the winning the Senate seat gives us a world platform. Absolutely. To talk about stuff. That's what it will give us. And basically it'll give them a huge megaphone on a world stage, because the United States Senate, there's 100 of those guys, So that's what it affords people.
What's the website again where they can reach you?
Shiva, SHIVA, 4 Senate.com. Shiva4senate.com.
Okay, I'll put that in the link below.
Put it in the YouTube thing, push it out there. Yeah. And when it's done, let me know, because we'll also put it up on our YouTube and we'll push it out on all media.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. And That's all for this week's Independent Thought and Freedom episode. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like, and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.